Okay, good now? Awesome. Here goes. So today we're debating BDS, which is the Boycott, Divest, and Sanction movement in regards to Israel's occupation of Palestine. It is based after the same BDS tactic used during apartheid South Africa, which was largely successful in ending apartheid there. The resolution is not asking for a change in the status quo, because I'm asking not to do something, nor is it stating a fact. Because of this, it's a values resolution, and I'll be presenting a values case. I would like to define illegal as contrary to or forbidden by law, especially criminal law. That's from the Oxford English Dictionary. My values will be justice and freedom. I use two values because the resolution is true for two reasons. First, BDS is a just action on account of Israel's flagrant human rights and treaty violations. And second, every person and organization has the freedom to participate in BDS if they so choose. I will explain this in just two main points. First, BDS is a just practice because A, Israel's illegal settlements. As of December 2016, the UN Security Council reaffirmed that Israel's illegal settlements in Palestinian territories, quote, had no legal validity, violation under international law, and a major obstacle to the vision of two states living side by side in peace and security. End quote. Human rights violations. Amnesty International says that freedom of movement restrictions for Palestinians, arbitrary arrests, detentions, torture of detainees, including beating, slapping, painful shackling, sleep deprivation, use of stress positions and threats, and suppression of free speech are all actively occurring. In fact, The Guardian quoted UN human rights chief this year, just in June, saying that we need to end Israel's illegal occupation of Palestinian territory. He says it has caused, quote, a heavy humanitarian and development burden on the Palestinian people, which he said had, quote, fueled recurring cycles of violence and retribution. C, bombings. Israel has been condemned by groups such as the Human Rights Watch in 2009, which said, quote, Israel's repeated firing of white phosphorus shells over densely populated areas of Gaza during its recent military campaign was indiscriminate and is evident of war crimes. Finally, banning BDS violates basic freedom of speech. My second value is freedom. First Amendment says Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof or abridging the freedom of speech. In RAV, the City of St. Paul and Virginia versus Black, even cross burning was upheld as freedom of speech, and BDS absolutely is protected speech as well. Thank you.
It's with great joy that I accept this debate with you tonight, Joe, after the thrill of our last debate. And I thank you for agreeing to engage me on this pressing issue, which I believe is relevant in our day. Now, the BDS, also known as Boycott, Divest, and Sanction movement against Israel, is nothing short of what I believe just another example of Israeli hatred. This time pushed largely by one group that's called Students for Justice in Palestine, which is a group legitimately associated with the Muslim Brotherhood and Hamas, a group as extreme in its practices as it was in its founding. These are people who shout Allahu Akbar at Jews walking around on college campuses. They suggest Israel doesn't have a right to exist and openly support terrorism. BDS founder Omar Baghouti once said, the two-state solution is finally dead. Some should issue the official death sentence. We can all move on, definitely, most definitely. We oppose a Jewish state in any part of Palestine, end quote. BDS calls on companies, citizens, college students, churches, and different countries around the world to collaborate in an effort to starve Israel economically and isolate Israel socially. Due to time, my case will be directed at Iran, which is not the United States. It's an Arab country in the Middle East, and it is recognized as a command economy. The United States is recognized as a market economy, and I agree with your premise that for the First Amendment would be at odds with the First Amendment. This is why I'm going to direct at Iran, which is a command economy. And countries with command economies, allocation of goods and services are made by government authorities, and they're imposed by law, which is why I can make it illegal. Which is why Iran is a country that can actually make it illegal to have BDS in their country, not other countries with mixed economies. The first reason I present a case to Iran is to declare the BDS illegal in Iran is because their president, Hassan Rouhani has made a pledge 3 years ago to reopen trade and industrial economic relations with its neighbors. But Israel and today the United States now do not believe they are communicating also to Israel. The declaring BDS illegal with meaningful legislation in Iran would be empirical proof Hassan Rouhani is serious about making the Iranian economy one of the top 10 within the next 3 decades. And by all countries that Iran has officially recognized are inside its circle actually include Israel. Hassan Rouhani has been vague the last 2 years, especially at the World Economic Forum when he was questioned by Klaus Schwab, the founder, on whether his economic ambitions include Israel. With this meaningful legislation to declare BDS illegal in Iran, he would assert the world that he is open to trade and economic relation with Israel, who currently views them as the greatest threat to its sovereignty in the Middle East. And so that's how I open, and I'm going to give you a chance to challenge this premise, and then after I will provide a second reason as to why I believe that it should be illegal in Iran, which is a command economy.
That's certainly an interesting take. There's little evidence that anyone in Iran is, or I would ask if you have any evidence that anyone in Iran actually is participating in the BDS movement. I have this reflection on my glasses. I'm trying to avoid that. Here in the United States, it is a broad movement, but I have never heard of anyone in Iran participating in it. I'd like to see evidence on that. And both of us are Americans. Both of us are here in America. So I'm kind of going to take an American standpoint on this. But also, I would like you to respond to my values of freedom and justice. There's no question that this is not just Israeli hatred, as you put it. This is a question of justice. And I'm going to point to 2 examples of that in this speech to really drive that point home. The first is Anglican Archbishop Desmond Tutu of South Africa was a prominent civil rights leader during the South African apartheid. And during that time, he supported boycotting and sanctioning his country. He advocated for that with many others, and they were successful. They were able to turn worldwide support against the racially discriminatory South African regime. And because of that, they were able to achieve justice, which is my first value. That was largely successful, and Desmond Tutu was not unpatriotic for doing that. He was not against his country for doing that. He today advocates for BDS in Israel because he can see that they have some of the exact same injustices that were present in South Africa. A second example is renowned Jewish professor Norman Finkelstein. He says, quote, "Today, the occupation of Israel is cost-free. Europe subsidizes the occupation. The Palestinian Authority polices the occupation while the U.S. protects Israel from any diplomatic fallout." Later on, he says, "Who could not support boycott, divestment, and sanctions of Israel?" His parents were actually his parents were interned in concentration camps by the Nazis during World War II. He is definitely not as some radical right-wing anti-Semite. He's a progressive, less left-wing Jewish professor who sees injustice existing in the world, whose family has a personal connection to injustice, and who wants to see that same injustice righted in Israel. BDS is just, but we should also support freedom everywhere. People should not be forced to associate with causes they do not want to support.
I'm going to go with your. I'm going to argue against your opening statement, which I see in my notes before I go into the other arguments that you proposed. Now, Palestine. There's no historic right for the Palestinians to have an independent state. That state was called Jordan historically. When they partitioned, the British mandated Palestine. The original 2 states was Jordan and Israel. That's it. The quasi-little state, which is the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, the Arabs rejected the deal when Israel offered to give them those territories. Jordan is 70% Palestinian, and there's no need, I believe, to have a second Palestinian state in the region. When Jews left, the reason I say this is because when Jews left Gaza it became a Hamas safe haven for rocket attacks against Israel. And the same is expected to happen with regards to if if Israel leave their occupation of the West Bank, which is, by the way, legal under international law, because under international law, a country that is attacked, Jordan attacked Israel. That country who defeats the attacking country has every right to control a territory away from them, and that's what Israel did. Israel was not the aggressor to take over the West Bank. That it originally belonged to Jordan, but because Jordan attacked, when it was through repeated efforts that Israel told them to stay out of the 6-day war, which they were engaged in with Egypt and Syria, and so it was when they attacked Israel that Israel went to war with them and took over the West Bank. So I just wanted to clarify that. Now you talk about it's a values issue. I mean, I don't see a moral value in your position, because according to Texas Representative Phil King, he visited Palestine and the West Bank, and he has learned that the BDS movement and its supporters are ignorant that such a campaign hurts Palestinians in the West Bank. More than anybody else, their candy factories will be closed down, just like their SodaStream company did, thanks to BDS. A hit on the region through BDS won't hurt Israel, which is what BDS is really intended to do, but also Palestinian Arabs in the West Bank. And these factory jobs pay well and provide unique benefits to the Arabs. Now, I want to propose a question with this statement that I just stated to you. Would you like to live the rest of your life knowing your endorsement for legalization of BDS resulted in Palestinian blue-collar families losing their jobs and survival benefits? And with that, I'm going to just pause and just allow you to respond and allow you to challenge me, etc.
That's an interesting point there at the end, and I do have a response to it. So there's no question that BDS is meant to hurt the economy. And in addition to that, it may hurt some Palestinians, the very few minority of Palestinians who have approval to work across the border. Again, border checkpoints are a part of the injustice that does exist in Palestine. However, the same thing was true of South Africa. It absolutely hurt the same low-class Black inhabitants of South Africa were being repressed by the apartheid regime. Some of them, I'm sure, worked in factories that were hurt by the sanctions levied against them by the global community. But Desmond Tutu believes it was worth it, and he believes it's also worth it here. Many people do, because we're both Americans. Patrick Henry here in America famously said, "Give me liberty or give me death." Sometimes liberty is worth more than anything else, and it's worth suffering for in the short term. Now, the next thing I want to respond to is international law. You actually didn't cite any source for saying that international law supported, an Israeli right to hold the land. But what I have said, I've quoted the UN Security Council, the highest authority on international law, saying that Israeli settlements and their practices at border checkpoints, their discrimination, are clearly illegal under international law. And then finally, you mentioned that Palestine did not exist. You didn't provide a source for that, and that's just blatantly untrue. It was the province of Palestine long before Israel existed. I'm going to do something a little bit abnormal here. I'm actually going to pick up my computer, and on my wall over here, this is a map. It's an antique map of the region that contains Israel. It's from the 1800s. It's from the 1860s, from a family atlas. And right there, over on this side, it says Palestine by Johnson and Ward. It was called Palestine in the 1860s. Palestine still exists today. Palestine was called the province of Palestine when the Romans occupied it. Palestine is a real place that exists. That's what everyone refers to the region as. And it's not disputed by any of the authorities like the UN Security Council that many of the residents who owned land there for generations were pushed out. And in my next speech, I'll talk about a particular personal experience one documentary filmmaker was able to show about his family's loss of their land and oppression by Israel. But again, even if all this wasn't true, we shouldn't make it illegal to just support sanctions against something you don't believe in.
What you're saying with the map example you gave is that Israel has no claim in East Jerusalem. East Jerusalem, by the way, is the capital of Israel. East and West Jerusalem is one unified city, the holiest spot in Judaism, which predates Islam by a solid 1,500 years. It has long been a dream for 3,000 years to have for the Jews to have a Jewish capital in Jerusalem. That dream was fulfilled in 1967 after Arabs attacked Israel, and Israel responded, taking over the West Bank. That is in biblical times, Judea, Samaria, Samaria being the West Bank. And historically speaking, the Romans, when the Romans were in Israel and they conquered in Israel, Jews lived there. There were no Arabs there. And then you look at historically when the Medes and Persians came in, and you look when the Islamic invaders came in, even during the Crusades, when Catholic bishop and the popes, I don't remember the name of the pope. He actually declared, like, a lot of the Crusaders like try to eradicate the Jewish race, and it was in Israel that he actually declared that they go to take back the Holy Land. So this idea that Palestine always existed, there was not even a Palestinian people. Like, no, no, let me rephrase that. There was not even an Arab population at that time. What was the enemies? The real enemies of Israel at that time were what they call the Philistines in biblical times. There was never a Palestinian people. So that is a completely false history you gave there, and I just decided to challenge that. Now, I did not do the research on the UN, I mean, in regards to like having the actual number and etc. for that particular UN resolution. I did not do the research in regards to like quoting it, but that's what I read before. You have the numbers for it. Now, as I said before, you know, and I'm gonna say it again, you know, there is like the PLO, Hamas, and all these organizations that are fighting for a state and claim that they have rights to the state. Like giving terrorists a state is not a good idea. The Palestinian, like, it's not a good idea to give terrorists a state, especially when they had no rights to the particular area that they're arguing for, because Jordan originally occupied it, and Jordan has not claimed any rights to any of the territories where Israel is currently building settlements in. These were disputed territories, and for Palestine to say that, hey, these are territories that belong to us even from the beginning, that's a complete lie. And by the way, Israel does not treat Palestinians terrible. Palestinians rather live in Israel than in the Palestinian territories.
Okay, I'm going to just respond to some of those new arguments and get us back on track in terms of the overall arguments as well. I'm not too interested in the whole Jewish-Arab conflict, but the point is there were Jews, there were Arabs, there were people of other ethnicities that lived in a state called Palestine that existed, well, not even a state, a region that existed from the time of the Bible talking about the governor of Palestine all the way until the 1860s, when that map says this is Johnson's map of Palestine, to when the British Mandate ended in 1948 and the land was carved up and given half to create a Jewish state and half for the residents who lived there to be moved into. But that's been reduced and reduced and reduced and reduced. And now there's a problem. The people who live in these areas, which are administered by Israel, which Israel has complete control over and controls the checkpoints into, the flights in and out of, the ports of, they are not being treated as equal human beings, which is not good. That is an injustice. And my first value is justice. There's a very great documentary film called 5 Broken Cameras. And it's filmed by a Palestinian man who lives on the land occupied, that his family has occupied for centuries. It's a very small community. And he documents how year after year the settlements, the Israeli Defense Forces destroy their vineyards, their land. They don't allow them to make a living anymore, and they advance slowly the line of demarcation, which then they're not even allowed to cross anymore as the settlements expand and expand and expand. And again, these settlements have been found illegal by the United Nations Security Council, the highest diplomatic, authority on international law in the world. They've been denounced by Amnesty International, who I cited in my first speech, by Human Rights Watch, which I cited in my first speech, by the UN Human Rights Inspector, who I cited in my first speech, by Jewish academics like Norman Finkelstein and groups like Jewish Voice for Peace. This is an broad international effort, as you even admitted, by church and other groups to end what is obviously an injustice. However, what we also need to focus on is that we shouldn't make BDS illegal, because I think freedom is a more important value than limiting even speech we find to be reprehensible. Again, I cited where the Supreme Court said cross burning, practice used by the KKK, is constitutionally protected free speech, and why if that is protected, then this should definitely be protected. I don't find a compelling reason to rebut why we shouldn't follow my lead.
The fact that anybody takes the UN seriously demonstrates the anti-Semitism the world has become indoctrinated with. Of the first 103 resolutions of UN Human Rights Council, 56 of them were dedicated to ripping Israel. The UN is an anti-Israel forum. They condemn Israel more than Syria and North Korea, which has a real record of human rights violation against its own citizens. The Arab citizens of Israel don't want to leave Israel because of democracy, tolerant ideals, and I can't say the same for Syria or North Korea, nor can I say the same for Palestine or other Arab countries. The Palestinian citizens are pretty good in Israel. It's not an apartheid state. And the comparisons to an apartheid South Africa are completely absent because of the fact you have Palestinians who are able to run for government office. They're able to be integrated in schools with the Jews. All of these things you have South Africans that couldn't do. So the correlation is not there. They're parallel between South Africa and Israel, equating the two to apartheid. That's nonsense, utter nonsense. Now, another reason why Iran should declare BDS illegal is because doing so would decrease the likeliness that sanctions would be reimposed on them by the United States, and Iran nuclear deal would be kept by the Trump administration over the course of his tenure in office, whether that's in the 4 or the 8 years. And the Israeli parliament have said that the BDS movement is a big threat to them, just like nuclear warfare. So it will work to Iran's best advantage. The president of Iran, Rouhani, would do right by his own country and the Palestinians to declare BDS illegal, proving to America and Israel that Iran is not in fact committed to the annihilation of Israel. The serious likeliness they could in fact become top wealthy and also increase the seriousness in which Iran has said before that they are serious about becoming the top wealthy countries in the world in the next 3 decades. And enacting BDS, you are really hindering economic relations with a very vital partner in the region, which is Israel. Jews are leading in medical technology. They're leading in water conservation, and they're leading in great innovations. And I don't think Iran would want to definitely boycott Israel and divest from Israel when they are really taken away from themselves. Now, I want to look at historically at many authoritarian regimes in history and what has happened when they enacted anti-Jewish policies in their countries. And I'm going to go with Spain with their anti-policy of 1492. They expelled Jews from Spain. The effect noted by Johnson was to deprive Spain and its colonies of a class already notable for astute handling of finance. Tsarist Russia, the adoption of anti-Jew, anti-Semitic law weakened and corrupted the entire Russian government. Those laws also led to mass Jewish immigration, resulting in a breathtaking loss of intellectual and human capital. I'm going to talk about Germany next.
Before I continue on, I misjudged my time on the last speech. I just want to say I really don't buy into this Iran outlet for this resolution. As the affirmative, I had the right to kind of define where I'm talking about Iran. Again, there's no evidence that there's even a BDS movement there. It just seems like kind of a squirrely thing to do. But again, justice and freedom are my values that I promote, and I don't think my opponent has even suggested a value to hold over those as more important in determining the future of BDS. But justice and freedom are very important. Yes, the World Democracy Index, which takes note of human rights abuses in various countries, ranks Israel as a problematic democracy. They're not even willing to recognize them as a full democracy because of many of the problems. I already cited 5 or 6 different sources in my opening speech, but I'm going to go back over something that Amnesty International said. They said, quote, Israeli forces unlawfully killed Palestinian civilians, including children, in both Israel and the occupied Palestinian territories, and detained thousands of Palestinians who opposed Israel's continuing military occupation, holding hundreds in administrative detention. Torture and other ill treatment of detainees remained rife and was committed with impunity. The authorities continued to promote illegal settlements in the West Bank, including by attempting to retroactively legalize settlements built on private Palestinian land, and severely restricted Palestinians' freedom of movement, closing some areas after attacks by Palestinians on Israelis. Israeli forces continued to blockade the Gaza Strip, subjecting its population of 1.9 million to collective punishment and to demolish homes of Palestinians in the West Bank and of Bedouin villagers in Israel's Negev region, forcibly evicting residents. The authorities imprisoned conscientious objectors to military service and detained and deported thousands of asylum seekers from Africa. Israel has many, many, many human rights problems. And again, this is not a Jewish Arab thing. This is not about Judaism or the Jewish ethnicity at all. Like I said, renowned scholar Norman Finkelstein is absolutely in favor of this movement and in seeking justice for Israel, because as a descendant of 2 people who were detained by the Nazis in their concentration camps, he can recognize injustice when he sees it. And my opponent can say, oh, well, Amnesty is wrong, Human Rights Watch is wrong, Democracy Index is wrong, the UN is wrong. He can say everyone is wrong, but he's not giving the same amount of sources I am or reason to believe that. It's very clear that we should value freedom and we should value justice, and we should not make BDS illegal.
Opponent says he values freedom and he values justice, and he brings great attention to the killings of Jews in Palestinian and in Arab territories around the Middle East and the many Arab countries, including Palestine, where you have no Jews existing. He completely ignores that, but only sees the misharm that Israelis are doing to Arabs, but doesn't see the same correlation. I mean, that's a pretty dead end argument, because I can argue the same coming from the other side, and you can research this yourself. There is no Jews living in Palestine, and there are polls which state that Israeli Palestinians would prefer to live in Israel versus many of the Arab countries, including Palestine, in the Middle East. Now you talk about justice. Okay, it's not Israel's goal to have border checkpoints. They would rather to not have checkpoints, but because of terrorism, they had to do it. They have seen a decrease of 90% in violent terrorism since they've enacted their border security, and so they're doing this for security purposes. And they do not control any of the lives of the Palestinians in the West Bank, but with regards to movement, just like you stated, they are basically responsible for, and they're basically responsible for their own government in that region. We only control who can come in and now for freedom, I can talk from the perspective of being in Israel, because in Israel, Palestinians are free. They can vote. You have Arab judges. So this thing about them having no freedom there is completely not a complete nonsense. Now you can argue that they lack freedom in the West Bank, but however, it's a border security issue, because you have to be able to know who's a terrorist and who's not. It's a way of being smart and understanding your role in a government position, that you have responsibility of protecting your Israeli citizens in Israel, and also in the West Bank, because there are about 6 million Israelis who live in the West Bank versus 1 million Palestinian Arabs who live in the West Bank. So and they still face the risk. Those 6 million Jews in West Bank, they still face the risk of terrorism on a daily basis from threats from their government that they want to annihilate Israel. So the BDS does not help. It's a one-sided deal. And it should be declared illegal because it's really anti-Israel. And all the cases you gave, I basically refute. I basically challenge it, because there is really no substantiation. There is no evidence. There's no historical documentation to state that that the Israelis are doing the things that you said that they're doing. And so with that, I just allow